Please Don't Take My Sisters is one of the most challenging foster care memoirs that I've ever read, not because it's badly written, but because it's emotional, it's frustrating, it's triggering. It is well written in terms of the pacing, the development of the narrative. The ending is very rushed. I won't say what happens at the end, but if you don't like books, whether that's memoirs, novels, whatever, where the endings are really rushed, just bear in mind that that's something that does happen. But the rest of it is so shocking and so difficult to read that I couldn't put it down. And it is triggering. I will say with a spoiler warning certain things that might be triggering so you know before going into it that these are subjects that it might touch upon, but I won't say anything just now without a spoiler warning just in case you don't want to know that information. But this is about a brother who I believe was 13, Leo, and his two younger sisters, Amelia and Lexie, who are, I think, 4 and 3, but I apologise if I've got those ages not quite right. But they're taken into care because, well, actually, because of something that's quite, I think, would be quite common. One of the little girls is sick at school. They can't get hold of the mother, and the brother just says, I'll take her, it's fine, don't worry. But the school and social services don't want this 13-year-old boy to look after this sick little girl, so they go into care. And that seems drastic, but I can understand why they made that decision. And I imagine if this does happen a lot, in most cases it would be resolved quickly. You know, the mother might have just been at work, she gets home, everything's fine. But unfortunately, their mother is, well, she's got a problem with alcohol. She refuses to cooperate with social services. Despite the fact they've taken her children away, she won't even open the door to them. And it's very unclear what is going to happen to these children, whether they'll ever be able to return home, or if their entire life has been ripped out from under them because one of the girls was sick at school, and it just snowballs from there, and it's so uncertain and heartbreaking. And the girls actually are okay, they get on quite well, they seem to just adapt to their new situation with Maggie, and that's largely because, as we learned from the very beginning, that's largely because their primary caregiver is living with them. Leo did everything for them, and that's kind of one of the problems social services have, and why they're not willing to just let the children go back home without any action. So they're not too bothered because Leo is with them and he's the one who's always taking care of them. But for Leo, it's really difficult. And Leo's journey is the one that's the hardest to read. And I'll talk more about that with a spoiler warning. The triggers also revolve around things that he does, so I'll go into detail in a moment. But it's heartbreaking for several reasons. There are a couple of moments specifically that were really impossible to read. I also don't fully agree with social services decision. Not the decision that they took them from school, but a decision they made later on. But again, I'll mention it with a spoiler warning, but I think you'll know which decision I mean anyway. It's a very emotional read. It's very intense. I felt sick. I felt frustrated. Out of all of the foster care memoirs I've read, there must be about 60 of them by this point. This is one of the ones that provided the most emotions for me, or pulled out the most emotions from me. It was a roller coaster and I couldn't put it down. Definitely a very powerful read. I wouldn't suggest reading this first if you've never read any foster care memoirs, whether that's Maggie Hartley or anybody else, because it's much more intense than the average read. But if you are used to them and you're looking for something that's a bit more gripping, then yeah, proceed with caution because it's difficult, but it's absolutely worth it. So, spoilers from now. I'm going to go into some quite heavy spoiler details to expand upon things that I've briefly mentioned. So, spoilers from now. And the triggers, these were very difficult to deal with for me specifically, but Leo has an eating disorder, he self harms. The book really focuses on that. Most of it is about Leo because he's the one who's dealing with these issue, or I guess not dealing with them, as the case may be. And it's very triggering and very difficult to read and very detailed, and that's something worth bearing in mind. The decision that social services made, I don't think was in Leo's best interest. When they decided to put the girls up for adoption, I could understand. But when you care for children in the system, you have to do what's best for everybody. And they've basically ruined Leo's chance of ever having decent mental health because of what they've done. I truly, truly believe that. They didn't do what was best for all three children. They basically said, we'll do what's best for the girls. Let's just forget about Leo. It doesn't matter how this will affect him. But also, I think Maggie had a part to play in that because they said, I can't remember exactly who asked Maggie, but somebody asked Maggie, do you think Leo is actually suicidal? And she said, no, I don't. If somebody is self harming, never assume they're not suicidal. Don't ever assume it's just an outlet. And even if it is just an outlet, don't ever assume that they're going to not escalate it because once you start and you get used to the pain, it's always possible that you're going to cut deeper next time. And this is that's what we see with Leo. So if somebody says, do you think that person who is self harming is actually suicidal? Don't say no. Don't say no, I don't think they won't take their own life because you just do not know what's going on inside their head. Had she said, yes, I think he is suicidal, maybe social services wouldn't have been so quick with adopting the girls. But I kind of don't think that would have been the case. But they definitely didn't do anything with Leo's best interest in mind. And that is really disgusting. And the scene where the girls drive away in the car and he's left banging on the living room window and wailing, I couldn't. It was impossible to read. It was so raw, so emotional, and really challenging. And as I said, the ending is very, very rushed. But at the same time, I do think it was the best possible outcome for Leo after the fact. To be honest, I was personally waiting for the girls' new parents to turn around and say, you know what, we can't put them through this. Let's also adopt Leo. Of course, that wouldn't be fair. There's no expectation for them to do that. But I just don't understand how they could adopt those girls, seeing the pain it caused Leo. And also, as we found out, the pain it caused the girls because they started to struggle with it once the reality sunk in, I just feel like there was this wasn't the best outcome. I completely get the need to get the girls out of the system as quickly as possible so they can have a normal, happy, healthy life. But you have to care for all three of them. You have to do a balancing act. You can't just say, okay, the girls can get adopted. The boy who has an eating disorder and is self harming, we can just forget about how this will make him feel. Because that's not right. You should never do something that significantly hurts somebody else. You have to balance things and find out what's best for everybody. And what's best for everybody, in my opinion, would have been a two parent, no other child, long term foster care placement. Because for all intents and purposes, when you're in long term foster care, it is like a de facto family. And actually, we learn a lot of well, maybe not a lot, but some long term foster carers do go on to adopt the children they care for. So, really, it's just on paper that they're not a proper family. So, that would have been the best option for everybody. Yes, it might not have been as good for the girls to not be adopted, but then they would have had their brother. And to me, that's more important. So social services really messed up with this one. But it is a very gripping read. And honestly, it's the second time I've read it. I couldn't remember the details from the first time, but I could remember it being intense. And I don't know if I'll ever read it again because it was it was a lot. It was a lot to deal with, a lot to take in. Absolutely worth it, but I think two times is enough.